Centre for Society and Mental Health seminar series. My name's Annie and I'm a research affiliate of the Centre. It's really wonderful to have everybody here today. You're all extremely welcome, and it's fantastic to have people joining us from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, different sectors, different professions and different lived experiences. So we welcome everybody here, and we're really looking forward to joining you for this, what's going to be a fascinating presentation from Anna, and then hopefully some really lively question and answer session afterwards. For those of you who don't already know the Centre, this event's been organised by the ESRC Centre for Society and Mental Health at King's College London. At the Centre, we aim to promote and sustain good mental health in communities by bringing together people to explore and understand the impact of society and rapid social change on mental health. We're interested, as one of our sort of core aims, in shifting public debate about mental health away from a focus on individualised interventions towards social practices and policies that can really promote and sustain good mental health in communities. So as I say, you're all very welcome if you're an old friend of the Centre or new to the Centre, but we're really excited today to have Anna join us because Anna's research interests have a lot of synergy. She's been having conversations with us already about the overlaps and interests around mental health and different research methods to try and really explore and improve understanding of people's experience. So we're really looking forward to that. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Just to help Anna as she's presenting, if you could keep your own mics muted. Afterwards, after the main presentation, we'd love this to be a sort of a dialogue. So at that point, please do put your cameras on if you wish, unmute, and we'll have a Q&A. Either people can raise hands or we'll do that in the chat. We're about to begin recording in a minute. Madeline, who's helping us with the tech, will start recording and you'll get a notification. We'll stop the recording after the formal presentation section, so the Q&A won't be recorded, so people can speak freely and share ideas at that point. So I'll give a brief introduction to Anna. We're really delighted to have Professor Anna Tarrant here with us this afternoon. Anna's a Professor of Sociology at the University of Lincoln and also a UKRI Future Leaders Fellow. Her research expertise broadly focuses on men's caring responsibilities, welfare and support needs, particularly focusing on low-income households, low-income families, and contexts across the life course, which we'll be hearing about today. She's the author and co-author of several books, and she's also the leader of the newly established Centre for Innovation in Fatherhood and Family Research at the University of Lincoln, which builds on her Future Leaders Fellowship, and we'll be hearing more about that today. We're going to be hearing some key findings from her recent research on the protective and predictive factors that impact on young fathers' mental health, and also some really interesting insights into the way that the projects have co-created resources with the young fathers who are part of the project. So just to finish, I'm personally particularly excited to be able to introduce and chair this session because Anna's also an absolute expert in qualitative methods, and I've benefited a lot from some of her writings have been key in my own development of my research ideas and projects in recent years. So it gives me great pleasure now to hand over to Anna for this afternoon's seminar.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie, for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to pop my video on so I'm not just a random voice coming through the screen. Hi, everybody. Just to echo some of Annie's really lovely introductory comments there. It's great to see so many of you here today and to have the opportunity to be able to share some recent findings from a large-scale study that I'm the director of called Following Young Fathers Further, which is funded by the UKRI Future Leaders Fellowship Scheme. As Annie said, there's a huge amount of synergy between some of our own findings and our own ways of working in terms of this broader research study. So when I first met with Hannah and was delighted to get the invitation to speak today, we were able to sort of identify lots of overlaps in terms of our sets of interest around young people, around marginalised communities and how we engage through research with marginalised communities, with welfare systems and reform and the kind of so what questions, how do we develop or envisage more supportive and compassionate futures that enable us to support mental health as a protective factor rather than sort of meeting it when it's at crisis point, and also using innovative methodologies in order to do that as well, and to think about these kinds of questions with research, through research, and then also with the communities with whom we engage. So today I'm going to be focusing in particular on the gendered and relational dynamics of young parent relationships, but from the perspectives of young fathers. And by young fathers, we're referring to young men who first become a parent when aged 25 and under. This is a policy and practice framing for young parenthood, but increasingly we're sort of seeing through the research that it's up to the age of 30, 31 really, where young people are really struggling to establish themselves as the parents that they want to be. So essentially what we've done is we've followed those young men over time. We've explored a range of different themes, of which mental health is a key one. And we've published a briefing paper as a team in 2023 on some of the predictive and protective factors that we've observed through our extended research with those young men. And it's those findings I'll be sharing with you today. Just in terms of kind of broader context and situating this within broader debates, one of the biggest challenges really, I think, for researchers and for people who engage with men and with people around perinatal mental health is that there's a lack of consensus across the field as to how mental health should be defined. We can approximate that approximately 5 to 10% of fathers experience some form of perinatal depression. This is a reference or a finding by Paulson and Bazemore from 2010, so a 15-year-old reference now. And it's assumed that about 5 to 15% experience some form of perinatal anxiety. That's Leach et al. 2016. But much of this research focuses on the early days of entering into parenthood rather than kind of the longer term trajectories of parenthood and fatherhood for men as fathers. And we can also be sort of critically engage with that figure methodologically as well. Many people don't engage necessarily with that language of perinatal depression or perinatal anxiety. So when they present to services for particular challenges, they're not necessarily doing so through a lens of mental health. So I think we can infer and safely assume that rates of mental ill health among fathers as they transition into fatherhood and develop through that might actually be much higher than estimates suggest. I think the reason we can make that assumption and make that case is fatherhood is a major life transition. So it's one that carries a whole range of new responsibilities, a shift in circumstances and identities, and of course, new emotional pressures as well. The potential for men to experience mental health during what can be an emotionally destabilising transition to fatherhood has been acknowledged as an important public health issue much more recently. And again, core to that recognition and what's really important is that theorization around fatherhood and around the benefits of fatherhood for men, for women and for children are now starting to filter into and influence different forms of policy and public health delivery. So this is a quote from the Institute for Health Visiting in 2022, that fathers are important and good mental health is important for fathers, their partners and their children. The reason this is really significant is that services historically have been defined as mother-centric, which is absolutely really significant. And it's important that women are served effectively by a range of different public health and social support services. But what's happened over time is that men have become excluded from those systems and services, seen either as a risk or a resource, so very much in binary terms, and not seen in a relational way in context of the value of engaged fatherhoods for mothers as well. We know from the literature around fatherhood, and this is a huge interdisciplinary literature, that when fathers are involved with their children positively, that children do better in present day and longer term on a whole range of different indicators. That can be educationally. It can be in terms of social behaviours. There's evidence of a reduction of criminal activity or engagement in those kinds of activities. So when we exclude fathers as a society, that's really problematic. We also stymie progress towards gender equality if we don't engage men positively and recognise their positive contributions in family life. In terms of mental health, and thinking more specifically about young dads, there's evidence to suggest that young dads are considered particularly at risk of developing perinatal mental health issues because they experience more stresses due to their age, and that might be financial concerns, challenges balancing education and parenting. They may also face more social exclusion or judgment, and also this creates a much larger shift in identity for a young man to a father with adult responsibilities. And certainly that bears out in my own research as well, including that with Bren Neal through the Following Young Fathers Further study that we'll talk in more detail about. But yeah, there's something very specific about young fathers' experiences that means that in the broader context of fatherhood research, their marginalisation, their disadvantage might lead to a heightened set of concerns around mental health and even experiences of mental health. So that's a bit of the sort of the broader context of what we already know, and a bit of a whistle-stop tour, of course. But I'm going to say a little bit more about the Following Young Fathers Further study to then contextualise some of the key findings. So Following Young Fathers Further is one of the most in-depth programmes of research about young fatherhood globally. Much research about young fathers is kind of dominant in the US and here in the UK. There are pockets of research starting to emerge in places like South Africa, but globally speaking, young fathers are often sort of marginalised in young parenthood research in favour of a focus on young mums. So this is all about kind of rebalancing that kind of methodological insight and ensuring we hear from the lived experiences of young fathers and not just from the perspectives of young mums. The broader set of studies have been funded since 2010, actually, and the Following Young Fathers Further programme contains 3 funded studies, and all of those have a qualitative, longitudinal and participatory design. So Following Young Fathers was the first baseline study. Again, a qualitative longitudinal study. The researchers engaged with up to 34 young fathers and interviewed them up to 5 times across their parenting journeys. So captured a broad sweep of their transitions into and through fatherhood. Again, there was a kind of a diverse cohort of young fathers who were interviewed, from those who were very low income all the way through to those who were perhaps more resourced financially and in terms of family relationships and broader social support. Another key feature of that study was engagement with professionals across the health and social care and welfare landscape. And this was kind of the real first foray into kind of identification that men feel excluded and are being excluded to some extent as fathers from various forms of social support. In a second smaller study that started in 2016, it was an impact funding pot, and we sought to think about how we might change systems and services to more effectively support young fathers, but fathers in general. And we worked with practitioners, we worked with young fathers with lived experience of young fatherhood and trained them to train professionals around how to be more father inclusive. And that responded to evidence and gaps that we'd identified in the baseline study. Following Young Fathers Further started in 2020 and is ongoing, so that will be concluding next year, 7-year programme of research, up to £1.7 million worth of funding. In that study, we followed a select sample of 11 young fathers who participated in the original baseline study. So for them, we have a sweep of data now for over a decade, which is incredibly powerful data. Again, it allows us to track the dynamics of their journeys through parenthood, to think about the variety of trajectories that comprise their parenting journeys over time, and to really think about their engagements with different services and systems and the emotional impact that can have on them over time as well. We did some comparative research with some young fathers in Sweden. So again, we looked at different welfare systems and the extent to which different welfare systems either increase young fathers' need for support or not. And again, the impacts of that on their well-being over time. And you might not be surprised to hear that in Sweden, where we have a much more family-friendly and family-focused context, young fathers didn't feel, especially where they were disadvantaged, didn't struggle quite as much to be there for their children as they expressed their intentions to be in both places. The UK in particular, where we have welfare conditionality, where youth transitions have become increasingly prolonged, where work-life balance is really difficult to achieve, struggled much more to fulfil their intentions to be there for their children. And of course, that's had implications for their well-being over time. So those are the three core studies as a broad whole, but I'm going to focus in particular today on, as I say, on the analysis around mental health. In terms of the qualitative longitudinal research design, all studies involve this intensive tracking of young fathers, close collaboration with practitioners, but also their mental health pathways in context of wider parenting trajectories. So the key thematic areas that we researched and that we asked questions about in the interviews and that we analysed and presented in a book that came out last year called The Dynamics of Young Fatherhood included experiences of contraception and conception, relationships with the child, with their co-parent, whether in a relationship with them still or not, if they ever were, and also their wider families. So we looked at the role of grandmothers and uncles, brothers, whoever it might be, who were involved in some kind of engagement or not with the young parent. We looked at their education, employment and training trajectories, and some of them were neat, so not in education, employment or training, to again look at the impact of engagements with different employment situations and circumstances on their parenting journeys. And you won't be surprised to hear that one of the core findings is that how to be a good father is incredibly bound up with the ability to provide and be engaged in economic provisioning. We looked at their housing and living arrangements as well. So we looked at that in context of a housing crisis in the UK, an increasingly privatised housing welfare system, and looked at how housing allocations, particularly in social housing, are allocated based on gender. And again, we found that young men in particular are very disadvantaged in that context. They're not asked if they're a dad, and they're often placed in areas where it's inappropriate to have children. So things are really constraining their ability, again, to be there for their children. Another core element of our kind of trajectory focus and analysis was on their support needs and engagements with professionals. And that's anyone basically who engages with families and dads in particular across their parenting journeys. So there were interviews with health visitors, with midwives. We learned about their relationships with social services, with the family courts, and of course also with specialist father support groups. So this really helped us to build this very holistic picture of the dynamics of young fatherhood journeys and biographies, but in context of much broader social processes and interactions with different institutions. So following in fathers, just again in brief, so it started out actually as an idea for a study to explore the experiences of teen or young mums. Bren, who was the study director, went to a teenage pregnancy strategy board meeting and pitched the idea to the board meeting, and they said, look, there's no evidence about young fathers, so why don't you think about a study with young fathers? So this was a really lovely example of a researcher going out, hearing what was needed by people who are operationalising this stuff in the existing welfare context, and developing a project that thankfully got funded. And then enabled us to engage with this big 34-strong cohort of young fathers. Continued engagement with services and with professionals, local authorities and health services helped to identify participants for the study, but also to capture knowledge gaps as well. But overall, what this study has done is challenge deficit views of young fathers. And what we do now is advocate really strongly for more caring and compassionate practice and policy approaches. Sociologically speaking, we've tried to shift the language associated with young fatherhood from a very social problem focused approach, which is common in policy and public discourse around young fatherhood, to one of social engagement. And again, that's based on this idea that when we listen to the voices of dads, they want to be engaged in their children's lives. We've also been able to produce and promote an evidence base about what matters to young fathers and what works and doesn't in practice and policy. And this is what we've learned, and again, what's presented. So we know that these are engaged fathers navigating a whole range of systemic challenges. So they adhere really strongly to an ethos of engaged fatherhood, as I've talked to several times. Lots of the young men reported unplanned conceptions, but what we found is, again, by looking over time, that an unplanned child did not mean an unwanted child. So where they might have reacted with a lot of shock and a lot of surprise when they first found out about becoming a father, they work through those emotions over time. And again, we can start seeing through these kind of reactions to the pregnancy, the ebbs and flows and the dynamics of their mental health responses over time and their well-being over time. We found that relationships with the child's mother and maternal grandmothers were absolutely pivotal to father involvement or exclusion. The intergenerational kind of dynamics were particularly fascinating. If you look particularly in low-income contexts, maternal grandmothers really do provide a lot of control, if you like, over the extent to whether dad can be involved or not. So if they like dad, then they'd advocate for dad to be involved in the child's life. If not, then often decision making was deferred up the generations and reflect a really gendered intergenerational pattern of care responsibilities and their distribution. A huge finding among this cohort of young fathers, and again that relates really strongly to mental health, is experiences of social isolation and loneliness. They didn't necessarily use the language of loneliness, or social isolation even, but they told us about the loss of friendships, loss of ability to engage with people beyond the couple relationship very often, because they become a parent and because they no longer had the same experiences or circumstances as other young people in their cohort. We found that young fathers find it much more challenging to secure what they need to father, so insecure education and employment trajectories and disadvantage in the housing system, as mentioned. But again, for some of the really disadvantaged young fathers, there were much greater challenges in being there for their children. Lots were living in poverty. 5 of the sample have been or were in prison. Several have been brought up in the care system, so their own biographies of being parented impacted on their own self-confidence, if you like, around being a father. And there were those who disclosed mental health problems just in general. The interesting methodological dynamic here and challenge, and something I'd be happy to discuss at the end of the presentation, is the extent to which any of this is causal in mental health. So some already discussed that they had mental health problems before they became a parent and that was worsened, or mental health challenges arose because of the particular circumstances they found themselves in when trying to be an effective father. In terms of support needs and service systems, we found that many of the young men do come into the orbit of a variety of services and systems, and that they're underserved across the welfare system. We've been really cautious in our research not to allocate blame or judgment to people within the systems and the services themselves, but to try and think about the range of different factors that also shape those systems. And there's a whole literature starting to emerge about some of those, and they range from cultural, organisational and structural as well. But reasons why dads perhaps aren't engaging with systems and services in the way we might anticipate or expect, links to their own perceptions and responses to services. Lots of the young men report a lot of distrust and fear of worsening problems if they were to disclose mental health challenges or challenges with their children or with their partners. We identified lots of gendered ways of thinking about fathers and acceptance of stereotypes, really, that assume disinterest in parenting among them. For professionals, limited access to training and reflective supervision. So again, there's no space necessarily to take a trauma-informed lens in how they engage with fathers, to question whether the systems in which they're operating might be excluding fathers and not enabling us to see mental health challenges when they're presented. Constraints on workload capacity, the level of need of young fathers being translated into deficit assumptions, maternal gatekeeping, all of these kinds of things are interacting all at the same time to create a system that fathers don't feel they belong to. Nationally speaking, access to specialist support services is also a postcode lottery. So space for social support for fathers that might help to address social isolation and loneliness is very patchy nationally. There's a whole other range of other things going on here too. I'm a chair of trustees for the North East Young Dads and Lads, which is a specialist charity up in Gateshead. And again, some of the things that they're having to manage and navigate are really complex. Things that get reported and require support include neglected physical health. They might be experiencing loss and bereavement, drug and alcohol dependency, experiences of food, fuel and digital poverty, again associated with shifts around welfare conditionality and cost of living crisis, limited autonomy because of low educational attainment or need status, insecure work. They might lack qualifications because of disrupted education experiences, and we know that schools in particular have very limited guidance on how to support young fathers, not only with being a parent but also with mental health. There's lots of evidence of homelessness and poor housing among those in particularly low income circumstances. There may be relationship breakdowns as well, which can lead to child access issues, and also fear and distrust in terms of engagement with children's social care proceedings. So this is an incredibly complex set of challenges, particularly that low-income fathers are dealing with and managing, that we're asking professionals actually to be aware of and to address it through support for young fathers' mental health. So that's kind of the broad picture of the baseline study. I'm just going to pop my light on because it's getting a little bit dark in here. So sorry, apologies for that. So in Following Young Fathers Further, we had a cohort of 44 young fathers. 34 of those were in the UK, 10 were in Sweden. And as I mentioned, 10 of those, were interviewed in the baseline study. We identified a whole new set of thematic areas to explore with the young fathers in more depth. We started the project in 2020, so just when COVID-19 hit. So we started the project in January, and it was in the March that everything got shut down. And as you might not be surprised to hear, the mental health impacts of COVID-19 were absolutely huge for everyone, but particularly for those living in disadvantaged circumstances. In a second wave of interviews, we looked at gender ideologies that they hold in relation to work and care, their relationships to shared care and parental leave. We decided to do a small subsample of research with 4 of the young men on mental health, and the selection criteria for that was young men who disclosed that they had mental health challenges in earlier interviews. And then in the third wave of interviews, we looked at the cost of living crisis. To synthesize all of this data, and we used a framework analysis and then engaged in both synchronous and longitudinal readings of the data. And I'm going to talk about some of that data now. So transitions into parenthood. So I'm going to talk about Corey. He's a 19-year-old, and he was talking about this in wave 1 of our interviews. And then Ben, he's now 29. He was one of the fathers who we interviewed for the mental health subsample for that strand, but he became a father when he was aged 25 and under. So here, Corey says, my partner went to hospital like 8 times. I was the one who always sat in the hospital by myself, 8 hours with a newborn, not really knowing what to do. I had to go and ask nurses and stuff for help. It's embarrassing, like you do feel a bit embarrassed. Like it's normal for being a first-time dad, but still you feel like you should know how to do things straight away. So for Corey, kind of the shock of becoming a father, and then partner also kind of being unwell, had a really detrimental impact on his mental health and his well-being. But also tied up in all of this is a lack of confidence around being a young dad, being a new dad for the first time, and a reflection of the fear that I think many men feel in asking those questions in that particular high-stress context. Here, Ben talks about the sheer toll on his mental health from becoming a parent for the first time. So he says, I was dealing with that for a long time, and it wasn't until I got onto medication and private counselling that I managed to kind of deal with a lot of it. I don't know if I would blame it on entirely on becoming a parent, but certainly becoming a parent really kind of triggered a very big depressive period. It can seem very scary and it can seem overwhelming, but it does get better. And particularly as children get older, you grow into your role as parent. There's something here, I think, about trigger points, critical moments in which mental health concerns and ill health in particular might be triggered. And certainly for Ben, becoming a parent for the first time was one of those. He talks about time and temporality in this quote. He was dealing with it on his own for a long period of time. He didn't know who to disclose it to or who might support him with it. And actually, the only thing that did eventually help him to manage those things was medication, was access to some counselling to sort of deal with some of that experience. The time of adapting and adjusting to becoming a parent, which, again, is a very highly unsettling process for many people. A lot of the kind of discussions around their transitions into parenthood or also reflect highly gendered experiences. A lot of them talked about having to be okay because their partner wasn't okay and having to hold it all together because they're the man. So I think Toby's quote reflects that really well. So he says, you've got to be okay all the time. When you admit you've got problems, some people still take it as you're weak and you're not a man. I mean, there's more people now, I think, do. So these very traditional ideas about men and masculinities still have a massive impact on the extent to which these men feel they can disclose or seek support. Jake here says, I think I've still been kind of just chugging along on my own. I've been to that many kind of meetings and stuff with my partner, that if I've done anything, I can't remember. I think I don't know, maybe I put partner's mental health first because she has a lot of actual kind of diagnosed issues that we have to work through. Whereas if I'm feeling a bit, I don't know. So here, an example that's reflective of how lots of men might try and prioritise their partner's mental health, but often to the detriment of their own. And again, I think from a professional engagement point of view, trying to understand the extent to which that might be happening can be really powerful in terms of reaching out to that father, meeting him where he's at in terms of his own mental health status, for want of a better word. One of our dads was trans. For this dad, being a pregnant man was a very isolating experience. There's not many people in the world who can relate to that, especially at a time there was a lot of media and news about transgender people being bad. So again, mental health, well-being concerns may also be shaped by broader deficit narratives about particular parenting experiences. In the context of support, we see a variety of different practices. We know that effective support is really powerful for young fathers and for fathers in general, and they carry that with them throughout their life course journeys. But what they more commonly encounter is experiences of sidelining or surveillance. So here, Adam says that he felt sidelined, he felt invisible in terms of his own support needs and his own mental health. So he said, I used to go to the doctors and try and get the help, and it just you don't get any help. Say like now with me being depressed and they get social services involved because you're not an adequate parent, and it's like, what? And they just make the situation, you can make the situation 10 to 15 times worse. Reaching out and asking for help is the most risky thing you can do as a parent. As bad as that sounds, that is how it is. That is what it is. It's just how the system is. You can't do anything about it. So fear of services, fear of the power that professionals might have over decisions about who cares for a child really strongly shape these men's experiences of mental health and impact on their ability to disclose and to seek support and help. Here Archie says, again, red flags because they weren't treating me or my partner very well. So I was refusing to go to appointments. This was like before my daughter was born. It wasn't a very good initial meeting with everyone. So that initial meeting with professionals is again, absolutely key. There's a question over whether men are absent or not from services, whether they're hard to reach. We challenge that and say our service is hard to access. And in this case, Archie perceives that service is incredibly hard to access, and there's a lack of understanding of their identity. Effective support, as I mentioned, is really powerful. So again, here's some really good examples, I think, where effective support has been helpful for some of these young men. So this is Troy, interviewed specifically for the mental health strand. And he said, I was skeptical at first, but the hospital provided information about a specialist support charity. It took me a few weeks to reach out, but my partner was like, you've put this number for this mental health service and the perinatal like dad service. Why don't you do it? One day I did actually do it, and it's been a big help. Partner's certainly seen the difference every time I walk through the door from coming home from the Baltic. Good, you're so happy now. You had a good day. Yeah, I've had a great day. I had a great day with all the dads. It's been really good. So this is a specialist support service, one where there's availability of peer support. One thing that is really powerful, I think, in terms of broader holistic mental health support is not just the offer of health support, but social support as well. And we have to recognise that in a context where spaces for men to come together through friendships really are disappearing and being eroded over time. Particularly in a world where work isn't as what it was, where space is being gentrified as well. And sort of that's the sociologist in me looking at those kind of longer historical processes. But when we create these spaces of peer support, we can address social isolation and loneliness and the kinds of things that that lead to poor mental health. Liam here says, project worker pulled me out of the gutter, really, because at that moment in time when I was homeless, I'd lost the burn and all that stuff. I'm not going to lie, I did think obviously suicidal thoughts at that point. So I was down at rock bottom, and social worker one, project worker, sorry, got us contact. He got us all the stuff with court sorted, everything. So I owe them a lot. So again, here, a social worker, project worker, identifying with the challenges, the broader structural challenges that this young man is dealing with, helping to address the suicidal thoughts that were attached to that as well. And again, quite a gendered response, I think, suicidal ideation and completion when things get really, really bad. So what I'd like to do now, I've kind of shared some thematic data on sort of the various issues that might contribute to this more holistic picture of the mental health and well-being of young fathers. This is a very short 3-minute video. If you have seen my talks before, you may have already seen this, and so apologies if it's a repeat. It's only 3 minutes, but it's an example of a case of Adam. He was one of the participants who talked about mental health in that specific wave as well. But essentially what we've done is we've pulled together a range of quotes across the 10 years that we've been engaging with that young man. And what I'd like you to pay attention to is the interplay between the emotional side of being a young parent or a young father, the mental health or well-being effects associated with the various situations that he finds himself in. So I'm going to play that now. Can you please let me know if there's no sound as well? But if there is, just we'll keep it running.
I felt a little bit scared and a little bit sad. I don't even know why I felt sad. It was mainly excitement. Like I was jumping up and down. I'm happy. Like the whole being a dad thing is kind of scary because I'm only 16, but it's really nice. I feel supported, but it's a bit too much. Like especially social workers, they've got too much power because they can take away your kids. Yeah, where's me loads? Like I'd hate it if they took my son away from me. I just couldn't cope. I couldn't get over that I've got a baby, like I've got responsibilities, I need to grow up. It was all at once, and it was just too much for me, man. I just had to steadily get on with it and just start learning. Like yesterday, like I looked after him. I went to college, I finished at 3, and then I looked after him. He wouldn't stop screaming though, he just didn't go to sleep. My mum got back from work and like she took him off me. My son can't come to the hostel I've got to be there at least 4 nights a week, so it makes me a bit upset now and then, but like, yeah, at least I get to see him on a picture. I've been spending a lot more time with him. Like, it's great to have that bond with him and like be able to take him for walks and pick him up from school and carrying him on my shoulders. Like, we go to the park on the swing and we slide. I'm like a stay-at-home dad at the moment. Like, as a guy, you're told from a young age that you should work and provide, and it kind of takes its toll on you when you're not doing that. He's the only person that supported me without having to gain anything from it. I mean, like, apart from my family. He's always supported me. He did everything that he could. Like, you got to find your own way, but just to be able to speak to someone about like what was going on at the time, it's priceless.
Hey, I'm conscious of time and I want to provide some space for some questions. Just to summarise kind of our broader analysis of all of this complexity, because there is a huge amount of complexity here. But what we've been identifying here is kind of this kind of process of and the dynamics of mental health and how it ebbs and flows over time, but also some of the predictive and protective factors, so the contingency of the mental health of these young men across their parenting journeys. We know that they navigate a wellbeing spectrum over time, that young fatherhood can be actually a really positive source of wellbeing and establish a new identity and focus for these young men, as I think Adam's case shows so lovely and so well there. But nevertheless, the demands and responsibilities at a young age, limited access to resources, may tip these young men into periods of distress and mental ill health. We know that access in general to formal service support pathways are really limited nationally, and there's a huge amount of fear for disclosing the need for support among these young men. Sorry, I've lost my slides, haven't I? And that's something that might be ameliorated by peer support and by a much more cohesive set of national support for young fathers. Very briefly, just to address some of this challenge and to normalise really sort of discussions around mental health. We've co-created a mental health video series with young fathers based at the North Eastern Dads and Lads, and also in partnership with Cumbria, Northumberland, Tyne and Wear NHS Foundation Trust and their specialist perinatal community mental health service. There's a lot of words there. This is a 6-part series. It's voiced by fathers. We've got animations of fathers, and it covers some of the core areas around mental health and well-being that young fathers might experience and might need some support with. We've created this, or co-created it, I should say, for a platform called DigiDad, which is open access and is available online. And we've had specialist support and input on all of the materials so that we combine both research insights, professional insights, and the insights of young fathers as well. What we hope is that this creates a space for enabling young men to feel like they can disclose with hopefully less fear and less distrust of services, although there's a long way to go for that to become the case. Just in general, we've created a whole range of different resources about young fatherhood, again, all of which are designed to promote father inclusion as a wellbeing and mental health supportive agenda as well. We've created a toolkit for professionals where we encourage professionals to think through some of the things, the predictive factors that might impact on these young men's mental health. But in terms of my final conclusions, I think what our research really is demonstrating, what this analysis demonstrates, is just how important it is to take seriously the mental health of young fathers, especially where they're stigmatised. And, you know, we often hear awful narratives about them being sort of absent and deadbeat and feckless, and our research is a massive counter argument to that. Being a father is a positive source of well-being, but again, offset by some of those demands. There's a need for professionals, I think, to be alert to when mental health concerns might be heightened. So transitions during the transition to parenthood, where co-parents might be experiencing their own challenges, where there might be separation or divorce if they're married, or conditions of role stress. So again, struggling to balance provision and caring in a context where traditional gendered ideas are still very strong. An awareness of the contingent nature, I think, of mental health pathways of young fathers is absolutely crucial. So I think this takes us kind of, it's the longitudinal sort of positioning really, or view or framing of mental health that encourages us to think about the biographies of these young fathers and their mental health in social context and within broader sets of social processes. But we also need a framework of mental health support nationally that's based on care and compassion, as well as father inclusion. So offering support for fathers' mental health from the perinatal period onwards. It's already something that's starting to emerge in policy and being increasingly required. But if we do this, then the longer term outcomes for them, for their children, their partners and their wider family will hopefully be more effectively realised. Just to say, this is the site for the Father Inclusion Hub, and again, we'll share these slides. So if you'd like to have a look at that in a bit more detail, please do. That's a site where we're now sharing examples of good practice in support for young fathers and fathers in general. And it would be great to have examples on there of mental health support, and also the centre there, which is based at Lincoln. We've got a whole range of different resources, and there's some references there to some of the material discussed today. But I'm going to stop there and stop my screen so that we can go over to Q&A and some reflection. Thank you.